All righty, good evening, everybody. It looks to me to be 6 o'clock, 6:01 technically. So let's call to order the City Council work session for April 5th, 2021. A roll call, please, Sue.
I was holding a piece of paper up to my mouth like it was gonna, anyway, never mind. Long day. Mike McBride,
Here.
Bryce Cofield,
Here.
Elise Yarnell Holloman, Jules Martinez Plancarte,
Present.
Mayor Rogers,
Present.
Denise Bacon,
Here.
Stephanie Finley,
Here.
Mr. Mayor, well, all present with the exception of Elise, but I'll keep an eye out for her.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, council agenda and meeting. Any comments or suggestions regarding the business session?
I have one.
Yep.
There is a phantom item on the agenda, 7B. I apologize. I was doing training for someone last week in Granicus, and I put a test item on, and I forgot to take the test item off.
So
You've already done
2021, 5678.
Yeah, you've already done the population projections.
Good
We
news.
have. That did look familiar, I must say. That looked a little familiar.
You're so good, it's already done.
Yes, nice. All right, so that one, folks, then we strike 7B from the business agenda. All right. Council business items. It looks like we've got the February financial reports. Any comments or question on those, folks? Okay. Now, I do have one. The revenue obviously is down, but I'm just wondering if that is something we're concerned about, or is it just the cycle of when revenue flows in? I don't know.
I'm not sure if Rob is on or not, but we're always concerned when it's low, and it also may be the cycle. So I think yes and yes.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. All right. Let's move on to presentations. This is a work session on wastewater master plan, technical update to implement the Riverfront master plan. And I believe Mr. Rux, you're leading us off, I believe.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I'm going to turn this over to Brett Music and his consultants.
Great. Awesome. Thank you. Brett, I think you might be muted.
Good evening, councilors. This is Brett Music, senior engineer here with the city. We have Emily Flock with Keller Associates to present a briefing on our technical update to the wastewater master plan. This is part of the implementation of the Riverfront master plan. So with that, I'll turn it over to Emily.
Hi, good evening. Thanks for coming. So as Brett said, this is the technical update to the wastewater master plan, the city council work session. If we can jump to the next slide. Quick agenda of what we're going to cover, just the background of the project overview, the updates that were done to the system, the subsequent evaluation, alternatives, the recommended alternatives, additional recommended improvements, which follow up into the capital improvement plan. Go ahead, next slide. And so a little bit of background. The main driver of the master plan updates is the Riverfront master plan, which was accepted by the city in September of 2019. And then there's been a few other additional developments, improvements, planning, information that's relevant to each utility that was included in the individual master plan updates. The main goal and objective of the update was to reflect the accepted Riverfront master plan data and recommendations into the city's master plans. We also incorporated a couple of other developments and planning information that's been updated since the master plans were first completed. And then a sort of parallel piece was we did look at the infrastructure-based time extension request, also known as the IBTR, to look and see if there were any necessary wastewater improvements required with the IBTR's planning criteria. So next slide. So project overview, very similar. The scope was the IBTR was looking at increasing those housing densities based on the House bills and checking whether there was any improvements needed for wastewater infrastructure. And then incorporating the Riverfront master plan into the wastewater master plan. A couple of additional items that were also included in the project was reviewing the evaluation threshold with the Citizens Advisory Committee. We added the River Run subdivision, which is part of Riverfront. I'll go over a few more details next slide. And then Springbrook Basin, was the East Crestview Drive and East Crestview Crossing projects. So after updating that system, we updated the evaluation alternatives and the subsequent capital improvement plan. And then part of the project was also public review and the council presentation. So we had 3 meetings with the Citizen Advisory Committee throughout this process. We're meeting with the Planning Commission later this week. And then today is the council work session. And if everything proceeds as we hope, it will be up for adoption at your May council meeting. Next slide. So system updates. The base of this technical update was the 2018 build out scenario. So all of the growth areas of the build out scenario in the 2018 master plan were carried over into this update. What we also did then was we re-updated the riverfront area with the updated information from the accepted master plan. And that includes the River Run subdivision, which there are preliminary plans for and plats. And then the Crestview area was also updated. And next slide. So a little more detail on the riverfront. The light green, which I apologize, is a little difficult to see, is the River Run subdivision areas. And so again, those preliminary numbers of lots were used to update the flows in this area. The other colors you see here are the updated planning and zoning from the Riverfront master plan. And so those were based on acreages and matching the 2018 methodology from an acreage to your base flows. This area was updated with those loading, and some of the pipelines in pink were updated again to reflect the master plan. They had laid out a few more horizontal alignments, and so those pipes were included in this update. And you'll note over there, it says approximately 260 dwelling units are included in this area based on your acreage and your densities with the zoning densities. And then there are some commercial and industrial flows. The big blue, both the light and the dark blue, are types of industrial development. Next slide. The Crestview area is over in the Springbrook Basin. And so East Crestview Crossing is, or excuse me, East Crestview Drive is the northern pink line there circled in red. And then the Crestview Crossing is a private development that is the orange residential and pink commercial areas. And so approximately 405 dwelling units are included in this area, plus some commercial, and there is industrial flows that were included in the hospital growth area for that line that extends down to Fernwood Pump Station. Next slide. So looking at planning criteria, this is the criteria that we evaluated the system against to identify potential deficiencies and improvement projects. So the evaluation storm is a 5-year, 24-hour storm event, peak flows. For a little bit of context, for Newburgh, this is 2.9 inches of rain in 24 hours. I don't know if you will remember this, but in December, we had quite a bit of rain on the 20th and 21st, and those were only about 1.5 inches and 1 inch per 24 hours. So it's a pretty significant storm event that we're looking at to evaluate these two. The evaluation threshold, which is the threshold that we evaluate the system and identify if there are deficiencies that we would recommend capital improvement projects for. We reviewed 4 options with the Citizens Advisory Committee. A couple of them were, so 85% of the depth of full pipe, top of pipe, 1 foot above the top of pipe and 2 feet below the rim elevation. We moved forward with 2 feet below the rim elevation per the CAC's recommendation, and this matches the evaluation criteria that was used in the 2018 wastewater master plan. So there's no change there in comparison to the 2018 master plan. The design criteria, which would be what the improvements are sized to and any other future infrastructure would be sized to, is 85% full depths at those peak flows. And then pump stations are evaluated at their firm capacity, which means you take the largest pump offline and then the remaining capacity is considered the firm capacity. And this is in alignment with Oregon DEQ standards. I will take pause, any questions? Sorry, I went a little quick over all of that, but that's the system update for the most part and the planning criteria that the evaluation was compared against.
All right, questions, folks? All right, don't see any.
Great, so next slide. So the modeled system and drainage basins. So there are 3 main trunk lines that come down to the treatment plant. The yellow one we call the River Street, the blue is Hess Creek, and the red is the Springbrook Road. The purple hatching is the Fernwood sub-basin. And this one we bring to your attention because in the 2018 master plan, the northernmost piece of that purple boundary was directed to the Springbrook Road trunk line, that main blue line, rather than to the west and down to the Fernwood pump station. So the East Crestview Drive project allows flows to be directed to the east as opposed to the west up there. And so that was part of looking at this evaluation and the flows. Next slide. Here's our updated system evaluation. Again, the threshold criteria is 2 feet below rim elevation. And so the red dots are manholes that represent potential overflow sites. The yellow dots represent manholes where the flow is within 2 feet of the rim elevation, but does not indicate overflows. I will note there's areas of interest listed there, and the 2 that are highlighted yellow are the only 2 that have been added or changed since the 2018 master plan. So the Riverfront district, the proposed infrastructure, we highlighted just because there showed a potential and we wanted to make sure that it was associated with backwater on the River Street trunk line rather than any infrastructure deficiencies on the future sizing. And then the Fernwood pump station shows that it is undersized with the changes on the Crestview area. Next slide. So alternatives considered. Looking at the Springbrook Basin, there were 2 alternatives we looked at. The first tier, alternative 1, was to direct the East Crestview Drive to the east, and the flows would go down the Fernwood to the Fernwood pump station. And we did include infrastructure-wise, the main portion of East Crestview Drive is included in both alternatives as part of their capital cost because they would be built in, it would be built in both alternatives. So the other improvements highlighted here, there's a small portion of East Crestview Drive line, which is that pink curb up there that we included to connect to Crestview Crossing to direct it south to the Fernwood pump station. The Fernwood pump station, as I mentioned, needs to be upsized a little bit based on those increase in flows. Upsizing the existing line from East Fernwood Road north to Hayes Street, which is that purple section highlighted. And then there's a new parallel pipeline east on 2nd Street, and that's the yellow piece. And this is the same alignment as the 2018 wastewater master plan. It is 1 nominal pipe size larger than that previous improvement. And so next slide. The second alternative was to direct that East Crestview Drive area to the west, which would then continue down the Aquarius Boulevard subdivision, to the North Springbrook Road trunk line. And this is similar in redirecting it to the west, which was done in the 2018 master plan. So these improvements included pipeline upsizing through Aquarius Boulevard, which is that blue teal color, to accommodate that adjusted flow through the subdivision. Again, the line from East Fernwood north in the purple is upsized. It is one nominal size larger than alternative one's upsizing based on the flow redirections. And again, the new parallel pipeline to the south is included as improvements and matches the same as alternative one. So next slide. We looked at a life cycle analysis for these two different alternatives. So there's capital improvement costs that we cost out for those two figures you saw before. And then the O&M that we did over the 20-year life cycle analysis was for the pump station increase. We sized the pumps and we actually talked to a vendor, got some quotes on the sizing, and the amount of flow increase is pretty small in comparison to the size of the pump station. So the pump station is pumping around 1,300 gallons per minute or so, and it's only a 200, 250 gallon per minute change. And so the pumps that they recommend are actually the same model, but they have different impellers. And so the pump maintenance is the same for both alternatives. And then we looked at annual electricity for the additional flow that you're running through your pump station in where it goes through Fernwood rather than coming down the Springbrook Road trunk line. So looking at that 20-year life cycle, we recommend alternative number one, which is directing the East Crestview Drive flows to the east, and they will go through the Fernwood pump station. Next slide. So the other area that we looked at that was impacted with the update, the technical update, was over on South River Street and East 11th Street trunk lines. This area was also identified in the 2018 wastewater master plan. The trunk line's undersized for peak flows. It's not in a great place where there's a lot of options on parallel pipelines or redirecting flow to another basin to alleviate those capacity issues. We will say that potential I&I reductions could decrease the improvement sizes, and the 2018 wastewater master plan does a much more in-depth look at I&I and providing some recommendations for the city moving forward with their I&I program. And so we recommend that this pipeline is upsized. And we also recommend that you evaluate possible I&I reductions when you get to the pre-design phase to size this improvement project. Next slide. So the other pieces that were included in these updates were updating the future infrastructure for the Riverfront master plan, which again were reflected in that master plan accepted by the city. The pink pipes circled in red have been added since the 2018 wastewater master plan. So we had some infrastructure for it in the 2018, but since they've laid out additional alignment, we've added those pipe links in. Next slide. And then again, we added the Crestview area infrastructure that we're talking about. So on the East Crestview Drive and the Crestview Crossing, that infrastructure was not included in the 2018 master plan because the planning hadn't been done for where those alignments might be. So these pipelines are now included in as capital in your capital improvement projects. And these Crestview area projects, we did adjust them in priority within the CIP because they're both currently in development and going to happen sooner rather than later. So we wanted to reflect that in your CIP. And next slide, thanks. So this is the updated capital improvement project, capital improvement plan. And we have included all of the projects for the wastewater collection system in one table for easier reference. A lot of these projects have not changed from the 2018 wastewater master plan in scope, we did update costs. So we looked at unit costs and updated those cost estimates. And then we also used the engineering news record index to increase for inflation for lump sum costs that were in some of these cost estimates. So these are all reflected in updated 2021 dollars. And yeah, like I said, the Springbrook Road is the 1C there, is one that we've talked about. And then the Crestview infrastructure is there as 1G and 1H. And South River and East 11th Street, that project is in priority 2. It's that 2B project. And all the other projects, we also updated the Riverfront infrastructure and the Providence infrastructure as it relates to the Crestview project. So those are down in priority C. So those are 3B, C, and D. So they've been updated to reflect the newest planning information. And next slide, we look at just the priority 1 capital improvements over the next 60 years. And this is looking at breaking up those capital improvement projects budgets over the next 6 years. And again, everything has been updated to the 2021 costs, and the Hess Creek Phase 1 CIPP, which is cured in place lining to reduce I&I, is still your first priority. And Hess Creek Phase 2 is the second one. And this is a figure of the updated CIP, as we just talked about, so the locations for them. Again, those red Hess Creek lines in the middle are your top priorities. So the next steps would be incorporating feedback or comments from both the Planning Commission and the City Council workshop tonight, completing a final draft of the wastewater master plan and technical update, and then attending the City Council legislative hearing for the adoption process early May. With that, I will ask if there are any questions or comments on anything presented.
All right, if you have questions, raise your yellow hand or your regular hand, now that I can see you all. All right, I have a comment, and let me ask, I'm sorry, Bryce, did you have a question?
I did, yeah. Hopefully it's pretty easy on our documents on slide 13. I don't know if you want to pull that up. It's where you're talking about the different alternatives for Crestview.
Okay.
I was wondering if you could speak to like some of the rationale behind the recommendation of alternative 1. I mean, I can see on here it's a roughly $1.3 million difference, which I'm down, to save $1.3 million. And I'm wondering if there is more that goes into that decision. Again, 1.3 is not insignificant, and it's looking like this year alone, the total 21 estimates around 20.4 million. So yeah, if you could just give a little bit more rationales to the recommendation behind alternative 1, that would be great.
Yeah, so the majority of it was that life cycle cost difference, looking at that. And I will say that the Fernwood pump station, the pumps were installed about 20 years ago, which is about the life cycle of pumps. So we're expecting them to need to be replaced regardless of whether you're going to upsize them. And like I said, because the upsize is such a minimal in comparison to your lift station cost, the pumps are the same model. So there's not a large capital change between your pumps. And then in terms of maintenance, they're the same. And so it is mostly just a small amount of electricity, and looking at the 20-year planning, which is when you would then also replace your pumps again. It pencils out to be cheaper for looking to direct it to the east. And a lot of that is the replacement of an upsizing of a decent portion of the Aquarius subdivision trunk line in order to get it to that Springbrook Road.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, other questions, folks? Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
So the new pump that you were talking about, Are they still, rated at 20-year life cycle, or are they getting better than that?
Yeah, we still estimate around 20-year life cycle. And so I will say that your pumps are still there that are 20 years. And so doing good maintenance, I know they rebuild them as needed and check the impellers and do inspections. And so they certainly can last longer than that. But typically we would still rate them around 20 years.
All right, other questions, folks? All right, I don't see any at this moment, but counselors, I'd like to ask you all a question and whether this is something you might like to pursue. Crestview Crossing is a pretty isolated project where we've got 400 units, I think, coming in from what Emily just presented. Maybe it would be a good example to understand what SDCs are expected to come from Crestview Crossing and where that money is expected to go. It may be a reasonable sort of example that we can actually calculate what the wastewater is expected to be, and then later in tonight we'll hear about water, and really what that impact is. And I think, as Emily mentioned, 5.7 million on that projection for the 20-year cycle. How does that line up with the wastewater SDCs that we're expecting to receive? So if you all think that might be a good example that we could look at, I'd love to encourage staff to do that. I'm seeing heads.
I'm in.
Thumbs up. Okay. All right. Thank you. And hopefully it'll give us a real life example. So there we go. Any other comments or questions, folks? All right. I think that's it. Emily, thank you so much. Brett, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course, of course. So let's next on our agenda, item 5B, this is City Branding and Communication Plan Update. And I think this is Lacey, along with a few others.
Yes, hello, Council. Sue, am I able to share my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right. So hello. I'm here today with both Melita and Kim from Slate Communications, who are our communications consultant, to talk about an update for our communications plan, including our new brand guidelines. I'm going to take us through the presentation, and both Melita and Kim will be here for questions at the end. Just a reminder of how this fits into City Council goals. We are doing this primarily as a customer service goal. We are really trying to make sure that our communications coming out of the city and how we're engaging with our residents is improved, and we're showing more transparency and building trust. So to get us started, some updates that we've had since December of 2020. So our brand guideline packet was created. We have new updates to the discovery report, which should be in your council packet. We've created some communication templates, and we have some new communication tools for staff. I'm going to try to go through this pretty quickly because I know it's a pretty presentation heavy night. So if I go too fast, I apologize. So first off, our brand guidelines. So the reason that we wanted to create brand guidelines is really because we wanted to create a consistent and professional appearance from the city. All of our elements and all of the things that we're pushing out should look the same. And we wanted to do that in a way that really celebrates Newburgh as, a diverse and vibrant place. And so to start, we didn't change the city logo. This is still the same logo that was approved by the council in 2002. It has the same colors, but we're really trying to make sure that all of the uses of the logo are consistent. So this page just kind of shows, what the logo is, how much space you need around it. We have another page in the brand guidelines that say what not to do to the logo. So we don't want you to change the color of the logo. Please don't warp the logo. Please don't change the text of it, all of those things. Additionally, in our brand guidelines, you're going to find our color palette. So you can see that that's really based off of those logo colors, as well as we have some secondary colors to really add some pop to different things. They should be used, minimally, but still to create an impact. That sort of red pink represents the camellias in Newburgh, as well as that more like tan wheat color is for our agriculture. One thing I'm really excited about that Slate created for us is these design elements. You can see they all represent something different about Newburgh, and it's really just to add some, visual appeal to the pieces that we're creating, and also, celebrate the green hills surrounding us, our wine community, as well as our agricultural pride. Along with those items, there's also updates to like typefaces, so we have branding elements around that. But I wanted to move on to some of the things that we have in the discovery report. So updates since the December of 2020, we've added roles and responsibilities, foundational messaging, audience segments, implementation plan, and metrics for success. As far as roles and responsibilities go, we'll call attention to that because it does have the city council on there as our elected officials. You all will provide insights to us about the priorities for projects and initiatives. The city council goals that you've created are definitely being put into our editorial calendar for the year so that we know what we're talking about and what we're focusing on, as well as, you all are giving us organizational and strategic direction. So this foundational messaging is really based on those communication focus areas that we talked about in the discovery report: the building trust, consistency and timeliness, equity and inclusion, internal competence and competence are those 4 areas. And this foundational messaging is really just to give voice for staff so they know kind of when we're talking about something, these are sentences they can always go back to. And you'll see in the discovery report, they're actually broken out by, how you would say this to a resident versus how you would say it to a business. Because we want to make sure that when we're talking to people, we're coming at, we're meeting them where they are. What are they looking at? What are they thinking is important? And then we're using this foundational messaging to really speak to those different areas. You'll also see in your discovery report audience segments. Those are broken out by the generations: millennials, Generation X, and baby boomers. In each of the audience segments, we have characteristics, communication and consumer behavior, and tools for communication. Something that was provided to me today by Slate is a metrics of different tools that we can use for each of these audience segments, as well as internal staff, city council, and non-English speakers. And this is important because it really shows that we can't use the same type of tools to reach every person. And we know that. And so when we're trying to get something out to people and engage with different audiences, we need to make sure we're using all the tools in our toolbox. And saying, okay, we know we've done this and that might reach this population. What other populations are we missing and how can we reach those? When it comes to the implementation plan, you'll find in the discovery report that's based on those communication focus areas again, the building trust, consistency, timeliness. And this is really more the things that we're going to be doing in the next couple of years. Some that I want to pull your attention to include a new monthly e-newsletter that's going to be available in both English and Spanish. The projected launch date for that is August 2021. We're building out templates for it now and going to launch a campaign to get people to sign up. And that's really going to be to, show what projects we're working on in the city on a monthly basis. It's going to be a really digestible piece for residents and business community alike. It will also, be a great place for us to use that editorial calendar to focus on those different items, like including the city council goals, what are we doing on each of these items? Additionally, we're going to be creating a welcome to new residents postcard. So that'll be when someone signs up for a new utility bill account, we'll know they're a new resident. So we're going to be sending them postcards on a quarterly basis that, tells them really how to connect with the city, as well as how to access all of the resources they need. We're also making hot topic one-pagers. We have a couple of those almost complete right now, and that's going to be for more internal use. So both the city council and staff, kind of just a one-pager on some of those top level things. What are we doing? Why are we doing it? Just so that we all have the same talking points and are all on the same page. Additionally, we're going to be creating more media assets. So that's photos and videos, and we really want to make sure that those reflect the community. So really taking the time to make sure the photos that we're taking, the videos that we have, show the different sides of our community, show the different residents and businesses. We're going to be creating a translation resource list for departments. So when they do need to get a document translated, where can they do that at? As well as some internal tools for staff, which I'm going to go into now. So the first one is a community engagement spectrum, and this is based on the International Association for Public Participation. Has created this spectrum. We've made it Newbergified. So staff can really utilize this to determine what type of engagement they want with the community. So this is it. As you can see, the top 5 levels: inform, consult, involve, collaborate, and empower, really give a word to what type of engagement you're trying to have. And you can see the examples on the bottom really are the tools that we can use in order to reach that level of engagement, as well as the promise to the community. Are we just informing you of something, or are we involving you? Because those are 2 different things. And if we're involving you, we're making a different promise to you that what you say will actually be used to impact what we're creating. Some other internal implementation things we're creating include a workflow chart so that different departments can request and receive services from community engagement. this is important for kind of that quality control measure of, we're making sure everything that we're sending out is in those brand guidelines, as well as sort of, making sure I know everything that's going on. Right now, some things might get past me, but we're gonna, bring it all into a centralized resource, which brings me to the centralized resource platform. That's going to be our method for sharing resources like those brand guidelines, making sure that people are able to access those branding elements, as well as we're going to be creating a communications training program. So that's going to be both on how to use those new brands and resources, as well as some communications 101 training, like, how to write for a website, how to write press releases, all of those items, as well as more to be determined. We're going to, see what staff wants and what staff needs and then respond to that. So that is all of the updates since December of 2020. That was really fast. So now I would like to open it up to the council for any questions.
All right, folks, questions? Can't see everybody. Let's see, Mike, is that a question?
Yes. So if you're going to send out postcards on a quarterly basis, do you have any idea what the cost of that is going to be?
I have not cost that out yet.
What? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Sorry. In our next fiscal year, we do still have a budget for professional services as well as printing and advertising. So we believe it'll fall in that budget.
I was just wondering, why we couldn't just put that in the existing bill or something, because most people are going to open up the bill. I would hate to have the postcard, people kind of look at it maybe as junk mail and it just gets thrown away and we're spending extra postage.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I know this was something that Kim and Melita recommended, so I don't know if you two want to speak more on that.
Yeah, I'll say, truthfully, the average cost is usually with print and mail, it's like $1 per postcard. And so it will be something we'll have to look at and see whether or not it's worth the additional expense or part of your budget. But from a cost perspective, that's usually what you can estimate. I do think one of the things that is nice, whether we do it through a postcard or whether we do it through the utility biller or bill stuffer like that, just some sort of welcome from the rest of the community. So it sort of doubles as both a, hey, here's the ways you can stay informed and where we want you to connect with us. And also with a community that is growing like yours, it also helps maybe create that sense of welcoming. So I think what we can do is figure out how that might fit into the existing budget like Lacey had planned. And if it gets to the point where we don't feel like we're getting that ROI, so to speak, we're not seeing the subscriptions to our newsletter, we're not seeing increases to our social media following, then we can take a look at whether it makes sense to move that back over to a more cost-effective option.
All right, let's go Denise, Stephanie, then Bryce.
Mine was actually a follow-on. Is there going to be a way to opt out? Because I hate mail.
Opt out of the
postcards. Yeah.
Well, it would be just the one time for, when you first move in and open that utility
account,
okay. You would get
good.
one postcard.
Okay, good.
The other one's an e-newsletter. So
perfect.
You can just unsubscribe.
All right, Stephanie.
I'm wondering, as we get more fluent in communicating with our residents, if we can do some research and targeting other languages besides Spanish. So figuring out what other languages our community speaks and starting to get some of the materials into those languages as well.
Yeah, I definitely think that's going to be a next step for us once we, sort of establish more of these systems of looking back and saying, okay, we're now reaching this population. Who else are we missing? And then how do we reach them? So I think that's definitely a next step.
All right, Bryce.
Yes, thank you, Lacey, for your presentation. Big fan of your work. Two thoughts actually revolve George Fox. So I noticed in the presentation you talked about generations going from millennial generation up through boomers, and given that Fox does play a significant role in the community, a lot of the students are Gen Z, so that might be a population that's interesting to engage in terms of research and reaching out to them. The second part with George Fox students, I like the postcard idea. I think like Mike had mentioned, we want to be conscious of costs. And if it's only new folks, I don't know if we have data in terms of what like the average number of new folks moving into Newburgh is. But I think it'd be worth looking into working with the new student orientation crew at George Fox to figure out how you can get similar information to new students that are coming, because I'm sure they would also benefit from learning about all the awesome things that are going on and how they could get involved in the city as well, because they represent a pretty significant population.
Yeah, thank you for those comments. That's definitely something we'll look into as well.
All right, other questions, folks, or comments? All right, one thing I saw, the foundational messaging that was listed there, can you tell me how that was developed?
Yeah, Slate, do you wanna? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll pop in on that one. So what we tried to do is take a look at those 4 key priorities that we established in the discovery report that Lacey summarized prior to that, and try to put some language behind it. So one of the things that we realize is that as we're creating materials, sometimes it's hard for departments to actually find sort of just the language that they can hold on to that helps them explain those priorities. And so that's really where it came from, Mayor. We are trying to find a way to give people those tools that when they're talking about how does the city approach the idea of transparency? How does the city, how are we working towards DEI? Really, it's just giving some simple language around these are our key priorities, and we're constantly bringing our communication back to these things over and over and over again. Now, I think, some of the other pieces in there, right, because there's a little bit of diversity, the idea that Newburgh is a great place for families and that we honor our history and culture, that really came from all of our stakeholder interviews in that discovery phase that we did. We heard a lot of that theme, that this is a community that does honor history and culture and past while also looking to the future. We also heard a lot that it was a great place for families, and that was important to people to have it be safe and to feel welcoming. And so really, I'd say those messages came from the 4 priorities that we established earlier, and then some nuance from the discovery report and stakeholder phase.
Okay, thank you. The reason I ask is I saw some of the council goals in the foundational messaging, but I didn't see them all. So I didn't see sustainability mentioned. I don't know that customer service was particularly mentioned. I think words like efficiency and customer in the city's operation would probably be important. And I think if we're talking about a great community, we know that that Newburgh is also very much a volunteer-driven community. And I think those are a couple of statements that probably might help with the foundational. But again, I just wanted to make sure, particularly the council goals were mentioned, as they are what we're trying to do, I guess. So anyway, all right. Any other questions or comments, folks? Okay. How's everything in Fort Collins, guys? Is it all right? Yeah. All right. All right. Well,
Guys,
anyway,
we are finally out from under snow. So thank
snow,
you,
yeah.
Lord above. We're
All
done
right.
with snow.
Right. Well, we may be done with rain, although I wouldn't count on it. But anyway. All right. Well, thank you.
Also,
Thank you so
I think,
much.
sorry, one last thing. I think I heard Rick say he wanted his specific Newburgh logo with the purple and gold. I saw those colors. If you could make that happen for all of his personal correspondences, that would be
Sorry,
great.
no,
He thanks
no,
you.
sorry. Black and red, maybe. We might consider it, but all right. All right. Speaking of which, well, before I go any further, Bryce, if anybody is watching or has some feed on what's going on in the NCAA basketball championship, please do not tell me. Thank you. All right. All right. All right. Anyway, men's championship, not the women's, which was last night, which if you missed it, missed a heck of a game. So anyway, all right. Great. Thank you all. Thank you. Melita, Kim, Lacey, thank you very much. Next on our agenda, 5C would be work session on water master plan. I believe this is Brett with assistance, I think.
Yes, we heard about the wastewater master plan technical update earlier. Now we have the water master plan technical update. We have Heidi Springer with Murray Smith to give a presentation on that. And again, this is related to implementing the Riverfront master plan. So I'll turn it over to Heidi now.
Good evening, Council. Thank you. We've come to our last presentation. I appreciate you all keeping your enthusiasm going for water master planning. I hope you will enjoy it as much as I do. Thank you, Bryce. Way to pump it up. So if you could go on to the next slide, please, Sue. So quick overview of the things I am going to cover in this presentation. You have heard about the goals of the wastewater master plan project. The water master plan project goals are really similar, so we'll go through those quickly. Talked a little high level about what our analysis process is when we say we're updating your water master plan. What does that actually mean? Talk about water demands and how the riverfront area may influence those in the future. Look at the review of your criteria, define what makes good water service, and then put those things together, do some analysis, and we'll show you the results of that analysis and how that leads into some recommendations for your capital improvement program for water. Next slide. So project goals, as Emily and Brett both covered, the driver for this utility plan update was really the riverfront, providing water service for the riverfront. So the 2019 master plan for that area gave some, actually, I'm going to cover that in a later slide. A secondary driver for this work came along as we were starting the project, which was House Bill 2001 middle housing. And the city asked us to take a look at how middle housing may impact water utility infrastructure, both north and south of downtown. So we'll look at that. Last but not least, the city worked on a seismic resilience plan for the water system, and this was a good opportunity to incorporate those recommended projects into your capital improvement program as well. The initial goal of the water master plan update was also to look at your system development charges, and we started that process and then understood from city staff that both council and your urban renewal program advisors needed more opportunities to look at what projects might be funded by the city and which ones would be paid for through development. So that is something I understand the city will be revisiting this fall. Next slide, please, Sue. So first thing we focused on was the riverfront area water service. The 2019 master plan established some future zoning and land use for this area and also gave water main alignments. So some general idea of where roadway alignments would be. This project was tasked with actually estimating what future water demand might look like for that potential land use and development, and then confirm what pipe sizes you would need to actually provide adequate water service and fire flow to the riverfront. Next slide. The second task was to look at the impact of middle housing. So how does middle housing impact the water system? The largest impacts to your water distribution system in terms of capacity, do you need larger pipes, are from irrigation in the summertime and required fire flow to buildings. So the water use per person for a higher density building is going to be less than that of a single family home in general because you don't have irrigated area to the same degree. But at the same time, larger buildings together with higher density generally does lead to higher required fire flows as well under the Oregon Fire Code. And higher required fire flows equate to larger pipes needed in the distribution system to deliver that flow with adequate pressure. Next slide, please. Few bullet points about seismic resilience here. If you've not already seen a presentation about your water system seismic resilience plan, I'm sure you will soon, so I won't go into much detail. But in order to do a water master plan update, the state does now require that water utilities look at seismic resilience for a Cascadia subduction zone earthquake. So essentially, where are the vulnerabilities in your system and what improvements might you be able to do to mitigate those risks? So we incorporated the results of that study, but did not do any additional analysis beyond that work. Next slide. So our analysis in this water master plan to look at those three areas was, first of all, to look at water demand. So we we're fortunate to be doing your water master plan in 2017. So we have relatively recent data and comprehensive analysis for the whole city water system. So the question for this effort was really, has demand changed significantly since 2017? That would lead us to do some more detailed analysis. And then how much will the future riverfront area, if it was fully developed to the intended land use, how much will that contribute to water demand? Then we also took a look at criteria that was established in your prior master plan and just make sure that that continues to apply. So these are your engineering standards and public health requirements, kind of all of those different things brought together. And then we compare those two things with your existing system using a water system hydraulic model. And that gives us sort of a performance report card for your existing distribution system. Which leads us into what your capital improvements might need to be to mitigate deficiencies. Next slide, please. Okay, so looking at water demand for the riverfront area, there we go. This is from the Riverfront Master Plan, and these are just general colored areas of land use. So what we did to estimate water demand for this area was look at the city's current water billing records and correlate that information with similar land uses in the rest of the city. So we're making the implicit assumption here that future water demand in the riverfront area is going to look similar to similar types of development other places in the city. Next slide. So quantity-wise, your current, we look at two different metrics for water demand, average daily demand and maximum day demand. So average daily demand is literally all of the water that you produce at your treatment plant over the course of a year divided by 365 days. And your maximum day demand is about 2 times that, and that's your peak irrigation demand in the summer. So your current demand, again, based on water production in 2019 was our data set, has a fairly minor change since 2017. It's not been a lot of years, first of all, and we're also seeing throughout the Pacific Northwest, and particularly in this region, conservation has been really effective. So while populations are growing, we're seeing relatively flat growth in water demand at the same time. The estimate of riverfront water demand's contribution is only about 0.17 million gallons per day. So that's 170,000 gallons per day, which sounds like a lot, but it's actually a fairly small fraction of what the entire city is using. Next slide, please. Okay, then we moved on to look at criteria. So this is kind of a general overview of criteria that we use for water systems. Here we were really focused on pipe. So we did a quick assessment of, does adding the riverfront area mean that you might need more storage? Does it mean that you need more supply? And that's not the case. There's plenty adequate storage and supply capacity. So we were really focused on pipes, specifically providing adequate fire flow to the area. And also that also played into the analysis we did for the middle housing, whether or not you could provide a certain level of fire flow at 20 PSI, which is the minimum pressure per public health requirements that you can have in your distribution system, even in emergency condition. Fortunately, Newburgh's water system actually runs at relatively high pressure. So you have a little bit more pressure to lose, if you will, when you're looking at fire flow events. Next slide, please. So the results of the fire flow analysis are shown on this figure. The red dots indicate places where fire flow criteria cannot be met, and criteria are established again based on land use. So if we're looking at middle housing, we would be looking at more of a multifamily housing fire flow requirement of 2,000 gallons per minute. And this is a general requirement when we are looking at CIP development for the whole system. An individual building could be sprinklered, which could change the fire flow requirement. An individual building, could be made with more fire retardant materials. There's a lot of nuance, but in general, when you're planning for the public water system, you want to look at sort of the conservative without being extreme case of what the requirement might be. So the red dots indicate inadequate fire flow availability. The purple shading is where we looked at middle housing south of downtown. And that's really where we see the most need for larger pipes. That's pretty much a 6-inch pipe grid throughout, and it can't provide a 2,000 gallon per minute fire flow through that 6-inch pipe grid, even though it is adequate to provide fire flow to the existing smaller single family homes that are there. Now in the riverfront area, there's not a lot of existing infrastructure. So where you're seeing some dead end lines that have those yellow dots along, I think it's the River Run subdivision, as that is looped back into the future infrastructure for riverfront, it will have adequate fire flow. It's kind of right on the boundary right now. Next slide, please. So this leads us to a recommended pipe network. The red pipes are those pipes required to provide both fire flow and water service to the riverfront, the planned riverfront area. It amounts to 2 miles of 8-inch and 12-inch diameter mains with a total estimated project cost, so that's engineering construction, of about $4.5 million. Next slide, please. Middle housing improvements, as I said, the 6-inch grid that exists in this area is undersized for higher densities of housing for providing the fire flow requirements for that. So we are recommending a lot of 12-inch and 8-inch pipes here. There are also some existing 4-inch mains, which generally with, you know, kind of modern criteria for fire flow, we do not recommend 4-inch mains unless you're building on a short dead end cul-de-sac that won't be looped in the future to other roadways. So that amounts to 2.9 miles of new pipes at a cost of approximately $6.6 million. I will say these estimates are on the conservative side, and they are planning level cost estimates. So if we have more refined details about individual projects, like the accuracy range can certainly be narrowed for these. Next slide, please. This is the list of seismic resilience improvements that were recommended for your water system through the Seismic Resilience Plan. $11.8 million. The largest ticket item there is retrofitting at your existing water treatment plant on the Willamette River. After that, some $1 million projects to both replace cast iron and concrete pipe. Both of those materials are more vulnerable in an earthquake because they are more brittle. They're more likely to crack and break, as well as most of them, the vintage of that pipe when it was most commonly installed, the joints were usually not restrained, and so the pipes can easily pull apart at the joints. So that's the reason for those two specific materials being selected. The other $1 million project is some control valves and piping at your North Valley reservoirs. So the North Valley reservoirs are a large source of treated water after an emergency. So the goal there is to preserve the water in those tanks in an emergency. There were several planning studies that were also recommended. Most of those are aimed at refining what improvements you might need. The geologic mapping from the state gets us to a point, and then you really need to do some other more detailed analysis on specific structures to determine what's needed. So that's what that is indicating. That brings us to the total CIP, which is a really large table that I did not include on a slide. It's not changed since 2017, except for these projects that we're recommending and projects that the city has already completed. So our next steps, next slide, Sue, will be very similar to the wastewater plan. Planning Commission hearing is on Wednesday, and then the final City Council hearing will be on May 3rd. And with that, if you have any questions, I will be happy to answer them.
All right, folks, questions? I can see y'all. All right, not seeing any, I don't think, unless anybody's got anything. All right, There's another chance. All right. Well, Heidi, let's see. And this is going to be probably a tough question. Just the HB 2001 projects something on the order of maybe 3% growth in units with this middle housing. All right. So given that, and this is probably sort of a theoretical question. So in the study area south of downtown, say there's 200 houses. Okay. So we're going to get an increase of 3%. So we may add 6 units. Does it make sense that we're going to spend $6 million for 6 units? Now I know that's initial and there may be redevelopment, but how in your mind do we justify that kind of expense for what may be a small increase in housing?
Doug, I probably need you to weigh in here because we did receive, in terms of projected units, that was work that the city did internally. But what I would say when you're looking just utility infrastructure more broadly, where are you putting those units and what sort of restrictions do you want to or not put on what kind of development can occur? So, you know, it's certainly going to be easier to build something closer to Winooski Road from a water infrastructure standpoint because you've got a large diameter main coming down there, your treatment plant's right there. It would be much easier to just extend a pipe from there to this higher density development. But if that's not the site that you have available, then you're looking at, okay, well, we could serve from this way, maybe we bring a pipe down from the north. So I think that these projects can be evaluated for a specific site, but knowing what you would need if you were going to put this higher density housing anywhere kind of lets you know what you need to ask developers to contribute to as they are thinking about these projects. That's kind of how I think about it, if that makes sense. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. It does. Thank you. I mean, I think, you know, it's just even our experience with ADUs, right? And if we start to make a lot of changes based on that, again, the impact has just not been as large as we might expect. Now, in the future, you're right, it could be, but at least initially. All right. The other question that I've got is where are we going to see reuse water come into the riverfront in the planning?
That was outside of the scope of this project. This was for drinking water. Brett, did you have something to comment on that?
Yeah, we're expecting with the reuse water comes from the wastewater treatment plant, has that capacity there, which is across from where the mill site is. What we're anticipating is that that's going to start with potentially with an industrial user as a potential aspect of that for bringing that across and getting it into towards the riverfront area.
Thank you.
This is Mayor, this is Doug Ruck. So Brett's right, you know, with the redevelopment of the riverfront site, we have shared with the developer the potential to have reuse water coming from the wastewater treatment plant. It's probably the shortest run we have to get additional users on that particular system. And it could be that the wastewater or the reuse water is used for chillers or coolers for a manufacturing operation, which is cheaper than the potable water system. It could also be used for landscaping, for irrigation. 15% of that site is going to end up being landscape. So again, reuse water is a cheaper option or less expensive option than using the city's potable water system. So as we continue the discussions with the current owner, we'll look at those options.
Thank you. So Heidi, did you look into reducing the industrial use of water if we're going to be using reuse? Was that factored in at all?
That was not factored in this analysis.
Okay, thank you. And I'll just say this, and Dan and I were recently on a conversation with Parks and Rec, and as we know, they are the sole user of reuse water in the city. So I'll just say anytime, and I'll say it again, I love this thought. Anytime we open a street, anytime we do anything, we ought to put purple pipe in the ground to make sure that we can add at some point. So
that's exactly right.
So that's my 2 cents on that one. So I just don't want to have reuse water get swept up under potable water, say. So anyway, so thank you. All right, anything else for Heidi or Brett or Doug, folks? All right, I've got 7:05. Why don't we give ourselves until 7:15 and we'll start the business session promptly at 7:15. All right, and thank you. Have a nice evening, those who are signing off.
Thank you.
Thank you. Here we go. Good evening, folks. This is City Council business session for April 5th, 2021. Let's call the meeting to order. And first off, I apologize for anybody who was waiting for us. We went a little long in the work session, so my apologies. Sue, a roll call, please.
Councillor McBride,
Here.
Councillor Cofield,
Heather,
Councillor Yarnell Holloman, Elise, Councillor Martinez Plancarte,
Present.
Mayor Rogers,
Present.
Councillor Bacon,
Here.
Councillor Finley, and for the record, Councillor
Here.
Yarnell Holloman is here.
Yeah, I said here, sorry.
And Lincoln said here also. So, all right, here we go. Pledge of Allegiance, please. I can turn my, I think you can see my flag. There it is in the background. I pledge allegiance to the flag of
the United
the United
States,
States of America, to the republic
for which it stands,
one
one
nation,
nation,
under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. All righty then. All right. Thank you all. Now, presentation. Child Abuse Prevention Month proclamation. April 2021 is Child Abuse Prevention Month. Juliet's House of McMinnville is asking the City Council to issue a proclamation and affirm the city's commitment to creating a safer, healthier, more thriving community for its children. This can be done by taking steps to help prevent child abuse through awareness efforts, prevention, promotion, and trainings on responding responsibly. Here is that proclamation. Whereas child abuse is one of our nation's most serious public health problems, with scientific studies documenting the link between the abuse of children and a wide range of medical, emotional, psychological, and behavioral disorders. And whereas it is estimated that 1 in 4 children will suffer significant abuse before the age of 18. 1 in 4, sorry. And annually, over 80,000 Oregonian children, 89,451 in 2019, are reported to the Department of Human Services as having been abused or neglected. And whereas the physical, emotional, mental, and financial impact of abuse falls on children of all ages and abilities who come from all economic, racial, and social backgrounds, and these crimes affect many more family members, friends, neighbors, and community. And whereas effective child abuse prevention efforts succeed because of partnerships created among state and local government agencies, schools, faith communities, civic and community organizations, law enforcement agencies, and the business community, while recognizing that feeling connected to community can be a protective factor against child abuse. And whereas the City of Newburgh is dedicated to stopping child abuse and supporting survivors and their non-offending families while working to prevent abuse. And whereas each of us has a role to play in stopping the problem of child abuse by learning how to prevent, recognize, and report child abuse, and supporting prevention, education, and empowerment programs for children and youth. Now, therefore, it is proclaimed by the Mayor and City Council and on behalf of the people of the City of Newburgh, Oregon, that we proclaim April 2021 as Child Abuse Prevention Month. All right, and then I believe Diane Longacre is on. Diane, did you want to add anything here?
I do. I love talking. Yay.
All right.
So good evening, Mayor, City Councilors, and City staff. I'm super happy to be here. I do know some of you already, but some of you I am just seeing for the first time, and I'm super excited about that. So, and Denise, your background is amazing. So thank you for that. So just real quick, because I know in the interest of time, you guys are very busy. I just drew up a couple things I'd like to say. If you'll bear with me, that'd be great. So first, I'd like to thank you for taking time this evening to include Juliet's House in your schedule. As you've just heard, each April we participate in National Child Abuse Prevention Month, and we appreciate you making the safety of our children a priority, not only this month, but every single month of each year. As I'm sure you know, and you've just heard, that untreated trauma from child abuse can have detrimental effects lasting a lifetime. Some evidence we see in youth and adults with untreated trauma can look like drug addiction, homelessness, criminal behavior, mental illness. So to really ensure that we have a healthy community, and by that I mean a community where intervention takes a key role in making sure that those 1 in 4 children that you mentioned who are abused, they have the tools, the structure, and the opportunity for success in adulthood. And a community where prevention is prominent, so that maybe we won't see 1 in 4 kids being abused, that they won't have to experience that trauma in the first place. So with that, we have a very full month planned at Juliet's house. I am hoping that you have already seen signs, ribbons, posters, yard signs all over Newburgh. And we also will be doing virtual, because it's a virtual world. And I loved your singing, by the way, that was great. We'll be doing virtual Stewards of Children workshops. And so I have a challenge to all of you. I know at one time you had discussed trying to get maybe all your city staff to go through the Stewards of Children training. It is just a 2-hour workshop, and we will be offering 3 opportunities this month to jump onto that 2-hour class. April 7th, we'll be doing a Spanish class, and April 8th and 13th will be English. Those run from 6 to 7 or 6 to 8 o'clock. And I can definitely get you more information on that. We do want to give a shout out though to the Newburgh Dundee Police Department, who has sent their staff through the training. So big kudos to them, yay. Also, we will be holding a Safe Kids Fair this year on April 17th. Additionally, we'll be doing Wear Blue Day on April 21st, and we will be having prevention rallies in every city in the county. So we'll hope that you will jump out and join us for that. More information is on our Facebook and Instagram. And then to wrap up the whole entire month, on April 30th, we're going to have our Celebrate the Children live virtual event from 7 to 8 p.m. I get to be one of your MCs, so it's going to be so fun. Can't wait to see you. And our silent auction opens up on the 23rd with the most amazing packages you could imagine. And other than that, that's kind of like the nutshell version of what's going on. I'm always available to answer questions or to come visit you and talk some more, to hear your story, to share my story. We just really want to help get that message out.
All right. Any questions or comments for Diane? Diane, the work you do is amazing, and it is amazingly difficult. So I cannot thank you enough for what Juliet's House does, all of us. And if you could send us, the listing of the calendar events, we can try to help push it out if we haven't already through the city website and that kind of thing, because I think it'd be great to make sure that that's really out there. So, so thank you, and again for all of your good works, and really in probably the most difficult subject you could imagine. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and we'll definitely get that information to you.
Okay, appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
All right, have a good evening.
Thanks, you too.
Thanks. Let's see, next on the agenda, we've got the equity assessment presentation, and I believe Dan and Ty Harden-Moore.
Yeah, if I can maybe just, while Ty's queuing up her presentation, just give a really brief introduction on this, which really, I think, as a title, it's pretty self-explanatory, the equity assessment, but it is an assessment of the city operations, and part of the council's goal, our operational culture becoming more one that adopts and cherishes diversity, equity, and inclusion as core value. This presentation takes a look at data that we've offered through human resources, folks who have applied for jobs, et cetera, through our various policies, procedures, and third party, Ty, who is a community member in Newburgh, is able to give us some recommendations on ways to improve. And so I'm excited to hear those and to get her report, and very much looking forward to incorporating that in our next planning year of work and activities of the city. So with that, I'll hand it off to Ty.
All right, thanks, Dan. So thank you all for allowing me to join you tonight and share about the progress on the city's equity assessment. The purpose of tonight's presentation is to summarize my findings so far and offer initial recommendation regarding the city's operations. So Maya Angelou said, do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. Each of us has a responsibility to do better in our pursuit of true diversity, equity, and inclusion. However, in order to do better, we know that we must know better. So the purpose of the City of Newburgh's equity assessment is to look inside of the city's operations, evaluate its policies, programs, and budgets to find areas of opportunity for improvement around DEI and offer recommendations and suggestions for implementation. So Newburgh can both know better and do better as it seeks to accomplish the city's goal of further developing an operational culture that adopts and cherishes diversity, equity, and inclusion as core values. So jumping in, we kicked off the equity assessment with a kickoff meeting in September 2020, where I met with the city manager and department heads to discuss the overall purpose of the assessment and let them know that various requests would be coming their way. I began sending out the data request in late September, early October, and those requests and data analysis will continue through the next few weeks as I begin to wrap up the assessment. And then I also shared a progress report with Dan in February, and I will have the final report delivered to you by your city council meeting in June 7th. The equity assessment focuses on 5 areas: workforce demographics, contracting data, planning, policy planning and budget information, community engagement and access, and community demographics. Internal information, including hiring, retention, and promotion data, was reviewed for the workforce demographics. Employee demographic information, including race, gender, age, language, disability, sexual orientation, were all looked at. And this information was handled confidentially within human resources, and all employee information was protected. So looking at 2019 employment data, we see that out of 170 applicants, 110 of them identified as white, and 45 applicants didn't answer at all, which is 26% of the total applicants. So that only leaves 15 applicants that identified as non-white in 2019, which is approximately only 9% of total applicants. So that can probably lead us to a conclusion that possibly applicants were not comfortable in putting their race if they were non-white. Now, taking a look at education level, most of the applicants were applicants who had a high school diploma or some type of mixture. A lot that said that they didn't complete school, some listed as students, some not listed at all, and GED. Disability was interesting in that 78% said that they didn't have a disability, but 21% didn't answer. And with that great of a number, it kind of leads you to think, is it possible that they do have a disability, but they weren't comfortable in sharing that information because they believe that it could be a barrier to their employment. 2019 female applicants, 84.6% identified as white. 15.4% did not provide their race. Same type of conclusion. Male applicants, again, we see 64.8% identify as white. Disability, again, for 2020, we see similar rates as we did in 2019. 87.5% said that they did not have a disability, while 12.5% said that they do. 2020 breakdown, a gender breakdown of applicants, 308 total applicants in 2020, and 185 identified as male, so that's about 60%. For race, in 2020, 70.8% of the job applicants identified as white, compared to 65% in 2019. So the statistic here is actually getting worse. So we really need to think about how to attract diverse applicants. So my initial recommendations for the workforce area are to encourage diverse applicants to apply. As we saw, we're getting even more white applicants as time goes on. So how are we going to reach out to diverse applicants and get them to apply? We also want to consider reducing the number of qualifications. Research suggests that when there are too many qualifications listed in a job announcement, that people of color don't apply. Also, it's important to include salary ranges for all positions and consider awarding preference points for Spanish-speaking applicants or other types of diverse applicants that the city really needs. And just consider broadening your outreach overall. There's so many places where you can reach job seekers of color. And so I would really love to see the city utilize some of those resources, like the Urban League of Portland's job board, Partners in Diversity, which is also local, or diversity.com, or Professional Diversity Network. Contracting data. So for this area, I reviewed purchasing policies and practices, including an analysis of awards from the city. Unfortunately, this area is not done yet, so I'm still working on it. But one of the things that I noticed is that the city is not currently tracking how they're awarding contracts to minority and women-owned businesses. So that is definitely something that I recommend, as well as creating an equitable bidding process for contracting opportunities. So that's something that I will include in the final report. Policy planning and budget information. Is equity a part of the city's decision-making process and guiding documents? I'm still reviewing this area as well, but some of my initial recommendations include updating the employee handbook to mention the city's commitment to DEI, because it's not there. Also, consider revisiting the probation policy to ensure that it's being applied equitably, encourage diverse applicants to apply again, and update all written policies to use inclusive language. So pronouns, things like that. And then add DEI to the onboarding process. So DEI is something that should be a part of the onboarding process for new employees. So not just something that's a blurb in the handbook, but really something that is integrated in their onboarding procedure. Community engagement. How does the city engage with communities of color, LGBTQ community, etc.? Police policies, complaints and statistics, and lack of access to available resources. I will look at all of that when I get to that portion of the report. Unfortunately, it is also still in process. Community demographics is also still in process. Census data, such as the city's population broken down by gender, race, age, language, disability, socioeconomic status, and sexual orientation, and any available data regarding housing, jobs, education, etc., will be reviewed for that area. So as I mentioned, the equity assessment is nearing completion, and I expect to have the final report to you all at the June 7th council meeting. The final report will include all that I shared tonight and more, including additional recommendations for creating an equity lens and a series of questions that we can really look to make sure that the city is really putting DEI at the forefront in everything that it does. So that is the goal, and there will be more to come, more in-depth information to come once the final assessment report is ready. So now I'd like to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to you for questions.
All right, folks, questions, anyone? I'm looking for hands, Not seeing any hands. Okay, Bryce, go ahead.
Hey, Ty, good to see you. Hello,
Good to
hello.
see you.
Good question. So, super excited to see the final report. Will you be returning? I don't know if this is a question for you or Sue or Dan, but will you be returning as well to go over the findings to answer questions that would emerge in the final report?
Yes. So my plan is to probably get it to you a couple of weeks before the presentation, so you have a chance to sit with it and review it. And then at that meeting, I'll present it like in a PowerPoint like tonight, and then answer any questions that you have.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Yep, helps answer my question. The second question I had, I appreciate your helping us make sense of some of the data, you know, whether it's around applicants choosing not to respond to particular points and whatnot. Two questions emerge from, like, one is, are you anticipating doing any qualitative forms of research to get like direct feedback from folks who maybe like worked in the city, so that we can know, you know, from their perspective, when and why and how and where they ended up responding the way they did? Maybe I'll pause and let you answer that question.
No, yeah. So I plan to work with the community engagement person. I'm sorry, I don't remember her name, but I'm going to work with her on that, because she did send me over some data. I just haven't had a chance to analyze it yet. But I think that, you know, it's possible that I could even send out a survey with SurveyMonkey or something, and it just be a short survey of current employees to ask them, like, why did they choose those answers, you know? But I was thinking about doing something like that, but I want to see what she already has, because I don't want to do something that's already been done. So yeah, it's kind of like, I'll get back to you on that. But yes, I do plan to.
Right. Now, survey fatigue is real. We don't want to press in too much. And then the last part is, yes, looking at applicants, right? And then looking at the demographics of folks who are applying is, of course, important. And, you know, to me, it leads to the next question of, given applicants, what have our hiring practices look like? Because as you know, you can have the most diverse pool and yet still have somewhat predictable outcomes. So that would be the other question I'd be interested in hearing about.
Yeah, you know, I haven't gotten too much into that. I've been focusing more on, why are we not getting diverse applicants, right? Because oftentimes in cities like Newburgh, you just hear, well, there's not any diverse applicants applying for these jobs, so that's why we have a lack of diversity. But we know we can't use as an excuse for a lack of diversity, because the applicants are out there, qualified applicants are out there, applicants of color and from other marginalized communities. We just have to find them. And so that's where I've been putting my focus. But I will speak with Allison about that too. Like, what exactly is the process? From my understanding, there wasn't much that can be changed there, but maybe not.
Yeah. And can I ask one last question real quick?
Of course. Yeah.
Timing wise, we're about to enter into budget conversations this week. I think tomorrow. Is that right, Sue? Tomorrow we start the orientation. So I'd imagine some of the implications of your findings would require intentional use of funds. So seeing as how we might, you know, the presentation's in June, and we might want to consider some of those things in the upcoming budget meetings. Do you have initial or preliminary recommendations around allocation of funds? I saw your presentation mentioned about like posting salary ranges, but I didn't see much else around funds or the financial implications of your report.
No, I don't. And so I just don't have that information. So I don't know if it wasn't available, but no. So is there something you were looking for? Like, are you looking for me to say, like, this is how much money should be spent on like this area?
Not necessarily. It was more of, again, just like a broad question. Yeah, without having given it much thought, you know, I didn't know if some of the findings are like, oh, we really need to, I don't know, increase internal capacity in understanding the differences between race and ethnicity, just as a random thing, right? And so you would recommend allocating particular funds to provide professional development opportunities for such and such, you know, folks, whether it's, you know, leadership or whole staff or city, something like that.
Yeah, but I mean, I will give those recommendations, but I wouldn't put any type of budget to it, just because I don't know y'all's budget. So, you know, it's like, so I can make a recommendation that like the city hire a DEI manager. But I don't, I can say what I think the salary range would be.
Sure.
I don't know what your budget is. So, I don't know how helpful it would be.
Yeah, well, actually, that's a helpful recommendation. So the specific funds aside, like noting what things we would need to be conscious of to put funds towards without the specific number helps. So,
oh yeah, I certainly can do that. I can say, funds should be allocated for this without putting a number to it.
Right,
Definitely happy to do that.
Thank you.
Jules.
Hi, Ty. So thank you, first of all, for doing all this amazing work for our city. I have a question. So you talked a little bit about reducing the number of qualifications on the application. And I've heard a lot of talk about this and why it's important. But I think it would be very beneficial for the rest of our counselors to hear a little bit more about this and why this is important. So if you could expand a little bit on that, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. So research has suggested that when there are a large number of qualifications listed on a job announcement, that typically women and people of color feel as though they have to meet every single requirement before they apply. And we know that that's not true, because sometimes you have skills that are transferable, but they're not exactly listed out, right? And I think we've all had that experience where we've applied for jobs where we didn't meet every single qualification, but we could do that job. So if we just reduce the number of qualifications, then it opens it up to more people. But when we start like listing out, 20, 30 things that a person needs to have, it becomes overwhelming and they feel like, well, gosh, I have 15 of these things, but I don't have the other 5. So I'm probably not even going to get an interview. And they take themselves out of the running. So they're doing themselves a disservice, and it's a disservice to the city. So we need to start really honing in on like, what are the true requirements for this position? Like, what are the absolute things that a person needs to bring, and what are the things that they can be taught, that they can learn on the job, right? And if there are things that they can be taught and they can learn on the job, then we can leave those off. So just list the things that are really concrete requirements, so it opens it up for more people to feel as though they are qualified and they'll go ahead and submit an application.
Other questions, folks? Comments? All right, Ty, one of the questions that came out sort of immediately, and this is probably last summer, was just a simple question that couldn't easily be asked, and maybe you know the answer now, but is how many people of color actually work for the city of Newburgh now? And that was something I know was hard to pinpoint, and I don't know if that's going to be a part of your thing, and if it is, that also leads to what positions do the folks hold? What has their promotion track been like? What are the opportunities? So I don't know if that's part of your assessment, but it would be probably useful, or employee satisfaction for that matter too. If we have we know we don't have a ton of people of color working for the city. I think you could safely say that, right? I'm safely say, but are the people that are working for the city that are of color, what is their satisfaction level? So I don't know if that's a part of what you're planning on doing, or.
It wasn't, but I'm happy to do that because I think it would be interesting. I don't know how many people of color work for the city because human resources can't track that, right? Because they can't say, well, are you really, a person of color or are you not? So it's kind of like it's up to them to say. And so I don't know concretely the number. I know, we were kind of talking about like what assumptions should be made, and I want to stay away from assumptions because I don't think that's a smart way to do it. But I would be happy to do a survey on staff satisfaction.
And it was just, just a thought to try to get, baseline data to even know. I mean, again, just anecdotally, it was funny when we, Jules joined the council, Bryce joined the council, and we really had no record of whether or not we ever had a person of color on the council prior. It's that kind of thing that actually speaks to what you're saying, is that we haven't even been conscious of it in terms of minority and women-owned business tracking, right? Mm-hmm. So anyway, so that's just underscoring that. Stephanie.
Yeah, this is more of a comment in listening to Ty talk, is that we also need to be a place where people of color and other marginalized populations want to work. And so addressing the things that we do as an employer that make it somewhere that someone would want to apply. And I think it would be useful information, like you talked about, if we do have employees that would help sort of do some of that work with us around how do we make this a place that is somewhere that people of color, women, other marginalized LGBTQ, AI populations want to work. And I think it's important to look at all this data and see that if we aren't doing the work internally, then it's going to be really hard, even if we are posting to different places, that we think we're going to get a better applicant pool, that we also need to make it something that's going to be a positive experience for people to come work for us. And I think, I like delving into this conversation because of that, that there are a lot of things that I'm watching just this presentation and knowing that there are a lot of things that we could do better, just on an anecdotal basis, to make it somewhere that people would want to work.
And I think Stephanie too, that it's important when the report comes out that maybe the city does a listening session. That's something we talked about early on and decided not to do it at that time, but I still think it's important to do, because you want to hear how people feel about working here, right? And the only way to really know is to ask them and to give them a chance to talk about it. We can survey it, but I feel like people really share their thoughts in listening sessions, especially when they're facilitated. So I think that that's something to talk about and see what comes out of that, and then what recommendations can come from there that can be implemented.
Elise, did you have a question?
Do we have any, I should know this, do we have any differentials in the city for different, incentive kind of qualifications that Ty was recommending, like Spanish speaking? Is there a differential for that?
Yeah, there's a pay differential for folks. I think they've got to take a test essentially or qualify for it, but there is a pay differential for Spanish speaking.
Any other questions or comments, folks? I guess I just have another question. And Ty, I think you probably know, but we're doing listening sessions, and actually Jules is helping facilitate those in the community. So that's another source, so that's external. The other question is, and this is probably more for Dan, but I know we talked at one point about doing DEI training and at least having as many people as we can go through it. Are we doing that? Have we done that?
With COVID, there really hasn't been the opportunity to do it as much. And, it's definitely obviously not in person and for a while, not at all. So I think we're trying to do that as we go into the next budget year with travel and training and some of those things. But it had fallen off as we were in the middle of COVID as an opportunity that we could even do.
Yeah. And can I just add about training? Like, if you decide you want to do training, I've been doing the training with the McMinnville Police Department, and we do it on Zoom, and it's been fine. I think it works. I think people like it like that too, so that, you get to just sit and you don't have to sit in a room like that. So I think that if you want to do a training around DEI, I think it can still be done on Zoom.
Well, thank you. Anything else, folks? All right, Ty, we look forward to the final report. So thank you. Thank you very much. And all right, moving right along. I think we're on to the city managers and city attorney reports. Which of you gentlemen would like to go first?
If it's all right, I'll duck out of the way first. And James is a little more organized than me. I think I can be brief. For my report, I was actually just to remind folks of the changes to our operations around reopening for whatever attempt we're reopening for. But we're able to offer services at City Hall beginning April 12th is the plan. We're going to have the utility billing counter open for folks Monday through Friday, 9 to noon. We're also still going to take payment over the phone and Dropbox. It's not required for folks to come in, but it is an opportunity for those who are preferring to pay in person. Community development, likewise, will also open from 9 to noon, Monday through Friday. They're also recommending appointments be made and for folks to be able to maybe start the process of communicating with the staff in community development either through emailing planning@newburghoregon.gov or building@newburghoregon.gov for your respective issues in those disciplines to make an appointment. The library, as folks may know, has been open for a little while now, and it remains on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Saturday, noon to 6, with in-person in the building, and on Fridays with curbside pickup from 10 to 6 p.m. We're in the process of reopening our court. The municipal court is limited capacity to 19 people, including employees and the public. And so it's a pretty small number, but what they're doing is essentially having people come through the building kind of in a single direction. So starting at the north side of the building and exiting through the lobby. So court is functioning and will be in person. The lobby of the public safety building will be open 8 to 4:30 with limited staffing, but folks will be around. And so for those who also want to have an in-person appointment with police or with the folks over in the police records, that is something that can be accessed as well. And just a couple other items. Chief Kosmicki and I met with Rob Dakin in Dundee to move forward on the police services agreement that we've had with them for the Dundee aspect of the Newburgh Dundee Police Department, and renewing that agreement. So I'm feeling good about where it stands. And I think City Manager Dakin is going to talk to his council this week and hopefully move that forward to the point where we can share that more widely. And then I think Mayor Rogers mentioned before in the work session that he and I met with the folks at CPRD, Superintendent Don Clements, and the CPRD board chair, who I think maybe down the hall from Mayor Rogers, Lisa Rogers. And so we had a good conversation about collaboration in the community and really trying to use the power of our two agencies to work together and to coordinate. So more to come on that, just really kind of the first meeting to kind of talk through some of those kinds of things. And reuse water, of course, did come up, but I think generally speaking, trying to think about like forward-looking projects between the city and CPRD. And with that, I will hand it up to James with his PowerPoint.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks for letting me share the update stage with you, at least for this particular meeting. And thanks, Mayor Rogers, and to the councilors for the time. I won't take a lot of time here, but I did want to provide a quarterly update. This is going to be the first in a series of updates for the foreseeable future from the city attorney's office on legal matters that we are working on for the city. This first update is not going to be necessarily comprehensive or summarize every single matter that's in the city attorney's office at this time. But I think that it provides a bit of a flavor and a brief overview of some of the items we're handling. Of course, councilors, Mayor Rogers, if there are any questions about any matters that we're handling, do not hesitate to reach out to me. And if I don't know myself, I'll certainly get the individuals at my firm who are involved directly in the matter to be a part of the conversation to answer any questions that you might have. Sue, can you go to the next slide, please? So a lot of what we've been working on out the gate here during this first quarter is ramping up and getting familiar with the city, with its processes, where we can contribute and add value. I've been the city attorney now for about 100 days, give or take. So that's always a big milestone. But in that kind of 100-day period, give or take a few days, we've had a lot of matters come in. But even in the midst of that, staff has just been incredibly wonderful from day one of our arrival, and the day one of our relationship with Newburgh. I really want to thank the staff for being so accommodating. It is not an easy task to transition from in-house counsel to outside counsel. It's, you know, not only dealing with one new face in mind, but several new faces from our firm with varying expertise, and the staff has been wonderful in getting us caught up, answering our volumes of questions, and just working through the process of getting kind of to the on-ramp and onto the expressway here. So I want to send a big thank you to staff. It starts with Dan, and I won't name everyone's name because I'll inadvertently omit someone, but it's been a real pleasure even through this first quarter to work with the staff here at Newburgh. We've received a number of matters. You can see from the bullet points as of the 28th, and even that information is a little dated now. 28th of March, we had about 43 matters that have come in. And when I say matters, I'm talking about kind of isolated scopes of legal work that have been submitted to the city attorney's office to provide assistance in some regard. So it's not, you know, I'm not counting, let's say, you know, staff meetings or work sessions or regular meetings. These are, you know, isolated, you know, contract reviews, code updates. They're isolated task matters, cases that have been submitted to the city attorney's office. So as of the 28th, we were around 43. I think we may be north of 50 now. And that averages out to about a new matter coming in every other day. So it's a pretty significant volume, and some of that are brand new matters that are coming across our desk that just come in with the city's operations, and some of these items are you know, getting ramped up and clearing some backlog too during the period where there was a transition from in-house to outside counsel. Sue, could you head to the next slide, please? So variety of expertise have been engaged. There's a partial list there, and just because there are other attorneys working in the background, you get to see my face at every meeting, but there are others that you don't get to see, and who have been engaged with staff. And so if you could allow me to just give a bit of a shout out in the form of their pictures and names on this slide. But the expertise is broad. We've got a deep bench between me and the 7 people listed on this site. There's about 200 years of experience in the legal profession. So we like to bring a great deal of expertise, and we're working towards a point where staff can be comfortable, of course, reaching out to me, but also knowing who at the firm has the expertise or has the knowledge to respond to matters efficiently and to respond to matters thoroughly. And so, you know, for example, I am not, my expertise is not in labor and employment. I'm not a labor and employment lawyer, but Jeff Chacoin and Iván Resendez Gutierrez, they are. And so those are the individuals that were as part of that process of familiarizing and building out our relationship. You'll see more individuals who can contribute and add a lot of value. Next slide, please. So I wanted to take a few slides just to kind of at a high level point out some of the matters that we've been working on to date in public works and engineering. Probably one of the most sizable updates that we made is to the professional services template. That's a contract that's being used on in connection with a number of capital improvement projects. And so we've made some updates there. I won't bore you with all of the details to those updates, but we've made some shifts in the risk profile and the allocation of risk between the city and the vendor on the other side of that contract to make it more advantageous for the city. and to add some protections for the city. We've reviewed a number of contracts in connection with the capital improvement projects that Karin summarized very well during the last regular meeting. Below or on this slide are a few examples of those projects where we reviewed, commented on, and provided advice on the underlying contracts for those projects. And then another example of our work with Public Works and particularly with engineering has been in connection with Elliott Road and the advancement of those improvements in that process. We've been thoroughly and very busy in the background on that project. Next slide, please. Community development. Been working closely with Doug Brooks and being support and being of assistance with him and his team. Just a few examples of some of the things we've done, reviewing and providing analysis and comment on the H&A and on the EOA. There were some definitions that needed some update in the development code, and so we made some updates to the code. That was, I believe, that was our first touch of the Newburgh Municipal Code, the first of what I anticipate will be many touches in the future. And then the last piece on Fernwood Manor and the property line adjustment there. That's an example of the some of the contributions we're making in connection with real property transactions that are going on in the city and how we're helping in the background to coordinate on those. Next slide, please. Public safety, kind of painted a broad brush here, but I won't steal Doug's thunder on the fire prevention and protection article and the updates that are made there, but we worked on the language in the building code with that update and adopting the code that's enforced by TVF&R. We've also supported Jean, your wonderful city prosecutor, who had the foresight and eye to combine the animal and dog ordinances to gain some efficiency in the code. And so we've weighed in on that process, that combination process. And again, well played, Dan, getting in front of me on the presentation. We did also contribute on the IGA for law enforcement services with the city of Dundee. Next slide, please. Just a few coming attractions. We have several code updates in areas where we see some value can be added. I referenced the small wireless facility ordinance. That is actually not in existence right now, but is an add to the code that we'll be looking at with small wireless facilities and the introduction of 5G. Urban renewal. I think the council is already familiar with the work in urban renewal, and we'll be assisting with that process and getting it set up. Purchase policies and procurement documentation. So some of this has been touched on, but it will be a big part of our role to assist with further developing procurement documentations and policies that align with Oregon's public contracting code. And so we're looking forward to adding value there as well. And then legislative redistricting advice. This is in connection with some of the tug of war that's currently going on at the state level between the legislature and the Secretary of State with respect to drawing district lines in connection with the census that isn't going to arrive as it's typically scheduled to arrive every 10 years. And so the city is going to have a role in drawing its lines, and we're going to work with Sue on that project. Next slide, please. So just a couple of really just reminders to the council. The city attorney serves at the leisure of the council, and we are, of course, available as we've shown during meetings, public meetings, during executive sessions and what have you, to provide advice and counsel. But as we get into particularly into budget season, we get into stickier questions sometimes where we are available to provide more formal memorandums, legal advice on certain issues or questions that may arise where we need to kind of hash out, a more formal written product. We're happy to do that. Presentations to the council, if there are certain topics that it would be helpful to have a bit of a primer, at least as far as how it's, certain concepts are set up from a statutory standpoint. We can certainly help with that. Also, in looking at certain concepts and how courts deal with them and how they're addressing the case law, we're available for that as well. And then I also listed here summaries on pertinent legal topics, as things continue to evolve. We're always available to jump in and provide commentary and thoughts on legal issues that come up. I think the first thing that comes to mind is we have a legislative session that's active right now. We'll be wrapping up in this summer. And so if to the extent that the council would like some background on a certain bill or a summary of a certain issue or topic, the city attorney is here for you to provide that service. So I'll stop there. That's my Q1 update, and I'll pause for any questions. Again, thanks for the time.
All right, folks, questions? Mike.
Yeah, James, I wasn't on the council when you were hired, so I'm just curious, what is your area of expertise? Is it land use, or do you have multiple areas that you're kind of an expert in? Or?
Sure. So my area of expertise is public records and public meetings. So working through the issues that come up kind of in that governance area with respect to public bodies and public entities. And then also I do a lot of real estate and construction work for public entities. So that is part of the reason why you see the list of projects from engineering and public works, is because that tends to be what I'm closest to. So those are my areas. But of course, the city has other areas where they need expertise, and we as a firm are not one to dabble in areas where we don't have the knowledge. So that is why I've got other individuals who will help with employment, for example, or land use is another example where I tend to use my colleagues and their expertise to assist.
All right, other questions or comments for James? All right, James, I gotta be that guy, but so 43 items in the first quarter. What I'm wondering is, this is a different format for us, right? So this is contracted work. How are we prioritizing and or gatekeeping the items that come to you? Just, because there is a cost portion, there's a cost aspect to this. So I wonder if you could help shed some light on that.
Absolutely. So there is a request process that that I don't want to say prevents, but basically is in place so that every item needs to clear certain checkpoints before it comes to my desk. And Dan may want to chime in more detail, but I've been working very closely with Robin Steele, paralegal at the city, and she kind of tracks those items as they come in. Dan is also able to see and sign off on those items coming to me before they come in. I think that the volume that you're seeing now is high because we're the new folks to the party, and so there's going to be some things that are part of that process of getting familiar with the city and its operations. I will say, one example of kind of an area where we're able to gain efficiencies, right, is with the updates to the professional services template, right? Now that we've got that template in place, now, the city can go out and engage vendors or other professionals, and it doesn't necessarily have to be every single contract comes, to my desk. There are certainly certain contracts, particularly as they get to a certain size or have a unique profile, that I want to see. For this, but it's not one where I have to see every contract. But Dan may want to add something to that piece.
Just quickly, in the interim period between our previous council and now, we instituted a request for attorney services form, and so that's the form that James referenced, and in essence comes to me, and Robin tracks it, puts it on a spreadsheet so that we're able to kind of look at the matters that are going forward. Realistically, we're moving work items forward, kind of based on work plans and based on the ongoing priorities and budget. And so, I think things are moving at a pace, and the steps going forward to have attorney review are all sort of, I guess, sequential to completing the work that's been budgeted for the year. I will say, generally speaking, my review of it is really just to sort of get an idea of what the request is. Is it clear? Is it something that is doable? There's a time frame that's requested by the department, and is that achievable, and those kinds of things, and then to send it on. The thought is that in the gatekeeping process that we would look to maybe later in the year and do a true up of are things happening on a timely basis? Are things happening, that don't need to go to the attorney's office and maybe could be shunted out, and staff could be trained or have the confidence to handle it themselves, those kinds of things. Are there efficiencies like the template that we can do to improve? And so I think just trying to use this first year and the first few months in particular to really look at the types of matters that are going forward.
Thank you. Bryce, did you have a question?
Yes. Thanks, James, for your presentation. I know there's a lot coming through, like you said, ledge session right now. So yeah, I'd be interested to see once things land where we're at and what we'll have to do. One thing that I have heard quite a bit about, both in the news and have had folks in different communities I belong to ask about them. I think the Board of Commissioners recently voted for Yamhill to become a Second Amendment sanctuary county. And so I don't know, and frankly, I don't expect that you have a lot of knowledge at this point, but it would be good to get some of your thoughts on it, or potentially help us make sense of that, because it does seem to be something that would be worth sort of talking through.
Sure. Yeah, I think that is something that we can certainly build out on, and happy to take a look into that. And for the council's benefit, cities tend to vary as far as, okay, procedurally, how do we want to handle engaging council to look into certain issues or to advise us on certain questions. And there's a variety of ways to do it. I think that the most common way is, during the course of like a regular meeting like this, if there's a discussion and there's a question that comes up, let's say about, not to pick randomly, transient lodging taxes, right? Like if there's something in particular that comes up, and, one counselor says, hey, that's a good question. Another counselor says, yeah, that's a good point. Maybe we want the, city attorney, can you take a look at that? And then the council can kind of elect to basically take a vote and by majority have me look into that. That allows for it to be an action of the council as a whole, and allows for the city to kind of tune or narrow the ask, if you will, so that it's cost efficient. To synthesize your question, Councilor Cofield, and your question, Mayor Rogers, that can be an effective way to do it.
Yeah, that's good, helpful context. So to correct, if other councilors think it would be worth looking into and or discussing, that would be good. If not, that's totally cool too. It might just be, certain folks I'm in conversation with, but I'll throw it out there as something that I noticed that might be worth having James look into.
All right, why don't we get a show of hands or nods or thumbs or something as to whether or not this, I'd like to limit the scope into what is the, if it were me, what is the city's responsibility if we live in a county that is a sanctuary for guns? What does that mean to the city of Newburgh? And and I see nods. Does that sound okay? Can limit it to that. Everybody, somebody's got to give me okay, I need to know. I can't see everybody yet. Thumbs up for yes. No thumbs for down. So let's see the thumbs. I'd probably like to see what it means. Okay. Okay. All right. So otherwise, it looks like, yeah, if we could, I guess if that's, unless we need to fill out a request for legal services form, which we could do now that we have one. But I think
we could probably fill it out for you.
There we go. Probably be prudent to look into it. The only other thing I've got to say, James, is if you're looking at contracts, now this was mentioned earlier, minority and women-owned businesses, it would be nice to have a way to make sure we're tracking who it is that we are actually hiring and contracting with. So again, I'm not giving direction, just anybody else think that that might be something you'd like to have included? Thumbs again. We got thumbs. Okay, looks like it. Okay. All right. So there's, we just added a few more things to your work list, James. That's and here I was trying to be saying gatekeeper, and I added a couple more. That's great.
Look at that. Look at that. Well, I will say that the Oregon Administrative Rules does have language where they do look at the engagement of MWESBs, minority women and emerging small businesses. The extent to which a public entity can bake those into their practices, their procurement procedures can look a variety of different ways, and that's the conversation that I can advance with staff and also bring to the council as well. So delighted to do that. Happy to do that.
Great. Thank you so much. All right. Well, thank you so much for the updates, Dan and James. I don't know if this is the appropriate place for this, but I'll run that risk. When we go out as counselors or as when I go out, people always ask routine questions that I can't always answer. And it's stuff that the people notice. Crestview Crossing, for instance, people love to know what's going on with that. I think they would love to know timelines. You hear all sorts of rumors about, the Whole Foods is coming in there or Trader Joe, whatever it is. So if there's that kind of update might be useful, because then when we're asked, or something as important as, a Jack in the Box is gone. What's going to happen? Oh my word. People are up in arms about Jack in the Box. So those kinds of things sometimes I think are important, because those are the people we see when we go to Fred Meyer or whatever, and the 45 apartments down on River and River Run and all this kind of stuff. So I don't know how that could be included, but sometimes those are the things that people like to hear about. So anyway, so something to think about.
Yeah, I think we could do that through Lacey's talents. Probably, I would assume, that fewer people are maybe paying attention to what I'm saying in these meetings, but certainly happy to give that update in here. But it would also be helpful, I guess, from my perspective, to be able to give some direction to Lacey if there are those kinds of things. When we talk on a regular basis, I can just start giving her that list. So, happy to know the grocery store questions, and we can start anticipating those.
Yeah. Okay. All right. And as they come along, we'll try to do it. But I mean, I think it's just things that are visible that people see, and that's, for instance, and we had this discussion recently, the school district in a year is going to be doing a whole lot of building in our communities. So anticipating that and what the city is doing towards that end is the kind of thing that I think people will ask. When we're talking about millions and millions of dollars of school buildings and whatnot. All right. Anyway, and if you guys don't think that's worthwhile, you don't want to know what's going on in the Jack in the Box building, well, you can tell me that too. I heard it's a Chipotle, but keep it quiet. I heard that. So anyway, all right. Where are we? Thank you, Dan, James. Thanks so much. Public comments, Sue. Earlier this afternoon, I heard there were none.
No, none tonight.
Hell yeah. Maybe when we get back to in person, we'll have public comment. All right. All right, moving along now. We're on item 7A. This is ordinance 2021-2873, an ordinance amending Newburgh Municipal Code Chapter 14.05, Building Code Article 6, Fire Prevention and Protection. And this is a legislative hearing. So let me open the hearing and declaration of conflict of interest or abstentions, folks. Again, like I always do in my day job, I work for Newburgh Habitat for Humanity. We build houses, and houses are subject to the fire code. So that is my declaration. All right, and Doug, the staff report, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Doug Rux, Community Development Director. So as I'm sure you're all aware, in November of 2017, citizens voted to annex into Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue Service District. In our code, as the mayor had indicated, under Chapter 1405, we have an Article 6, which is our fire protection. All of that language in the code was written to reflect that Newburgh had its own fire department. So with the annexation into TVFNR, we needed to do an update to that. You'll have a companion piece later this evening on a resolution to adopt the fire code. But first, we need to change the municipal code. So James graciously took on the task. So I did not write the code language. I just provided input, but I am the messenger this evening. So working with James and his team, language was crafted to update Article 6 on the Fire Prevention Code. And as noted in your RCA, there are 6 primary elements to that. And that's the adoption reflects TVFNR. The enforcement language needed to be updated to reflect TVFNR. There were definitions that needed to be updated to reflect TVFNR and their structure. TVFNR has their own appeals process. They have a fire board where individuals could make appeals to them. So we needed to add that language. There is a fee section that relates to TVFNR. And so that has been integrated in. And then there's a penalty section. And again, that relates to TVFNR. So in your packet, you will see in Exhibit A track changes, or something that looks like a track changes version. So anything that is a strike through is language that's being deleted. Anything that's a double underline is language that is being added. By adopting this ordinance, it would be the first step in this 2-step process this evening to ensure that TVFNR can operate and function within the city of Newburgh and enforce the fire code. Thank you.
All right, Sue, do we have any one signed up for public testimony?
Mr. Mayor, we do not have any public testimony for this item.
Okay, thank you. We'll close public testimony in that case, and the recommendation from staff. Doug?
The recommendation is to adopt ordinance number 2021-2873.
Any deliberation, counselors? Nope. Well, with that, no discussion. I could entertain a motion. And this, again, roll call vote, title only, by title only preferably. Mike?
Mr. Mayor, I move that we adopt the ordinance 2021-2873 as presented.
And read by title only?
Yes.
No? Sue?
Do you want to carry this over for a second reading? Or
Oh,
do you
yes.
want to waive the second? reading?
We would like to waive the second reading, I believe.
Yeah,
right?
let's waive. I don't think we need to have a second reading. Let's waive it.
All right. So waive the second reading. Let's vote on that first. Okay. All in favor signify.
You need a second.
You need
I'll second it.
Second. There's a second.
Mhm.
Can we just do a voice vote, Sue? The waiving of the second reading?
Yes.
Okay. All right. All in favor of waiving the second reading on said ordinance signify by raising your left hand. That's unanimous, Sue. All right. Now, Mike, if you'd like to continue, that'd be awesome.
Okay, so okay, so now I'm kind of lost what I'm supposed to continue on here.
Yeah, so the next one is for the ordinance itself, and to waive the second reading.
Okay, well, I thought that's what I just did.
Title only, by title only. My apologies. The ordinance and by title only. Gosh.
Okay, so I'll move that we accept this ordinance 2021-2873 by title only.
Okay. All right.
And I'll second it again.
Thank you,
Denise.
Denise. All right. Any further discussion? Okay. James, would you like to read by title only? Is that a part of the part of this?
Yes.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So up for adoption by the council is ordinance number 2021-2873, an ordinance amending Newburgh Municipal Code, Chapter 14.05, Building Code, Article 6, Fire Prevention and Protection.
Thank you. All right, and we would like a voice vote for this one, I believe.
Roll ordinance, so it needs to be roll call.
Roll call. Yeah, I mean roll call vote. That's what I meant to say.
That's okay. Counselor McBride,
Yes.
Counselor Cofield,
Yes.
Counselor Yarnell Holloman,
Yes.
Counselor Martinez Plancarte,
Yes.
Mayor Rogers,
Yes.
Counselor Bacon,
Yes.
Counselor Finley.
Yes.
Mayor, ordinance passes 7-0.
Okay, thank you, and thank you, Doug. Next, we're on to item 8A on your program. For anybody following at home, item 7B was stricken this evening. So we're on to 8A. Resolution 2021-3728, a resolution accepting the 2021 Economic Opportunities Analysis Report. Mr. Rux.
Thank you, Mayor. Doug Rux, Community Development Director, and we have with us this evening Beth Goodman and Margaret Ryman from Echo Northwest. They were our consultants on this particular project. So we're going to do a bit of a tag team. I'm going to cue this up, and Beth and Margaret are going to walk through some of the details. So we've given you some briefings. We've actually briefed the council 4 times on this proposal. We briefed the Planning Commission 4 times, plus they did their final review, so they actually touched it 5 times. And we had 7 meetings of our Citizens Advisory Committee, and one of those included our orientation session. As we've shared with you in the past in the briefings, primary goals for this was to project the amount of land needed to accommodate our future employment. And that horizon we're looking at is from 2021 to 2041, and to evaluate the existing employment land supply that we have within our existing urban growth boundary. And then the third is to fulfill the state requirements. And so that's statewide planning goal 9 and goal 9 administrative rule. We received a $16,000 grant from the Department of Land Conservation and Development to do this work, in addition to the allocation of general funds. We started this process back in January of 2020. The Planning Commission last touched it in March of 2021. So it does take some time to go through these processes. And so here we are tonight on April 5th, having this item before you to consider for your acceptance. So at this time, I'm going to turn this over to, well, Sue, let's go to the next slide. Let me talk about the committee first.
Okay, am I running this or is Beth?
You are.
Okay, sorry. Give me just a moment.
Unless Beth wants to.
I've got it up on my screen.
Go for it, Beth.
Yeah, you can go ahead and share it, Beth.
Okay.
All right, next one. So the CAC members that was appointed by the council. So Kurt Walker and Carl Biggerstaff were our chair and our vice chair. And our community members, Keith Hansen, Alvin Elbert, Isa Pena, Bob Woodruff, Philip Higgins, Rob Halliburton, and Jim Bush. And Rob Halliburton represented Friends of Yamhill County. Next slide. We also had a technical advisory committee and representatives from SEDCOR, Business Oregon, Oregon Employment Department, Brett Music and myself from the city. We had Yamhill County, ODOT, and of course DLCD was on that technical committee. They did not meet as many times as our CAC, but they were basically, they had six meetings overall. So now I will turn it over to Beth.
Well, thank you. And thank you very much, Doug, for saying all those names, because I would have done it poorly. I'm very delighted to be here this evening and to talk with you. I'm going to briefly step through the economic opportunities analysis. It would be helpful if you've got questions, if we just answer them as we go along, if that's okay. Okay. So An important part of the economic opportunities analysis, the EOA, is doing a buildable lands inventory, where we look at all land that's zoned and designated for commercial and industrial uses within the city, within the urban growth boundary. And I'll describe that in just a little more detail in a few moments. But in doing that, we found that there was a total of 130 acres of unconstrained, vacant, and potentially infill land in the urban growth boundary. 54 acres in commercial, 24 in mixed use, and 52 in industrial plan designations. So this is a map that shows where your land is. And for parcels that are potential infill, it shows the entire parcel, even though there's some development on the existing parcel. So in doing the buildable lands inventory, what we do is we look at first whether land has development on it or not. So is it vacant or is it developed? And if it's developed, is it partially developed or fully developed? We look at constraints such as floodplains and floodways, wetlands, stream corridors, extreme landslide hazards, and slope over 15%. We take those out of the vacant and partially vacant land, and then we come up with an inventory of unconstrained, vacant, and potential infill for commercial and industrial. So for instance, you can see on this parcel here, the white areas or the white area there, little white area there. Those are all constraints that have been subtracted out. And so that's how we got to that approximately, I think it was 130 acres of buildable land. And then we looked at potential redevelopment. And we got to that through discussion with Doug and looking at potential redevelopment sites, of which the West Rock Mill site is of course the biggest potential redevelopment site. And that's at 64 acres of industrial land and 19 acres of commercial land. And I think you've got a certain amount of certainty that that site is going to redevelop as there's ongoing discussions about development on that site. The mill site, of course, was not identified as vacant in the inventory of land because it has existing development, old development on it. The other sites that we identified are what I would call sites with redevelopment potential, where if you look at redevelopment potential, it goes from something like a site where you really do expect redevelopment to happen, like the West Rock Mill site, to sites that might have redevelopment potential. It seems plausible that over the next 20 years, they may redevelop. There is, of course, no guarantee that any of them will redevelop. And so that's how we assessed redevelopment potential. And looking at a summary of all of this, we've got about 233 acres of land all told that are either vacant, potential infill, potentially redevelopable, or I'll mention the Sportsman Air Park. We looked at that in a separate category of its own. You've obviously got more land at the airport than 11 acres that is vacant, but that land is either set aside for things that are solely for airports, solely aviation related, or it's land that's only available for leases, where you might have future hangars, that kind of thing. So we counted 11 acres at the air park as potential for development over the next 20 years. Before we go on, do you have questions about that inventory?
Mike?
So when you talk about the Sportsman Air Park, is the land, the big field that's next to the runway, can that ever be developed because you have an airport there? Is it prohibited from being developed?
And I'm going to have to ask Doug to take that.
Yeah, the field that you see is the grass seed field is actually, that is future hangar space. And so as Beth was mentioning, 11 acres could be for industrial and other portions are for the airport or hangars. It's that grass seed field is for future hangar based on the master plan.
Will that, do you think, stay as an airport for 20, 30 years down the road? I mean, is it like grandfathered to where it can't ever change if the owner decided to close down the airport and sell it off or something for something else?
Well, the future is always hard to predict, but the family has shared with me that their intention is to continue to operate it as an airport. They've actually had conversations with the city in the past about a pilot program through the Federal Aviation Administration. That through that program would be some assurances that the airport would stay in perpetuity.
Oh, okay.
All right, other questions at this juncture? Well, Beth, I have, you touched on the fact that the West Rock property, is developed, although it's being taken down not as we speak, but tomorrow it will start again. And I guess at some point here, you're going to get to the need of 152 acres of industrial. And if we're not counting any of the West Rock property that is going to at some point be annexed into the city, how are those numbers going to work?
We are counting that at the West Rock Mill site as part of the supply of land. So on this slide, we're showing it under the potentially redevelopable. That's the majority of that potentially redevelopable.
Gotcha.
So we have counted it in.
Thank you.
Certainly. Are there any other questions before I go on? Okay, so then we go to the other side of the ledger, looking at employment growth and land demand. We separated out how we did employment growth for commercial from how we did employment growth for industrial, because we looked at them in really fundamentally different ways. So we started with how much employment is in Newburgh currently for commercial. And then we developed a forecast, and Margaret will have to refresh my memory on this, that new commercial development would grow at the same rate. Margaret, was it as development in the region or as population growth?
I believe it was population.
Okay, so grow at the same rate as population growth in Newburgh, and that makes sense in a lot of ways, because commercial growth, whether it's for retail or for commercial businesses, things like offices, financial services, law offices, et cetera, is really tied in a lot of ways to population growth. So we forecast growth of 1,919 new commercial jobs in the UGB over the next 20 years. And we looked at potential development densities for those jobs and came up with an estimate of 83 acres of land in terms of gross acres. So accounting for things like rights of way for streets, 83 gross acres of commercial land. And then when we compared that 83 acres to the supply of 104 acres, you do that subtraction and you've got a surplus of about 20 acres, 21 acres of commercial land. So our conclusion is that Newburgh has enough commercial land to accommodate growth expected over the next 20 years. One of the recommendations at the end of the economic opportunities analysis is to monitor growth and revisit this over the next few years, because a little bit of development can sometimes spur a lot more development. So I'm going to turn to industrial development unless anybody has questions about commercial. Okay. All right, so industrial development, we looked at this in a really different way. Newburgh currently doesn't have a land base that's really well suited to large and mid-size industrial users. So we looked around the Mid-Willamette Valley region at cities like Albany and Corvallis and McMinnville. We included Newburgh in there, Salem and Woodburn, and looked at the characteristics of their land base. And even though, say, Salem is very different in terms of size than any of the other places, we're still looking at relative characteristics. So we looked first at the percent of existing employment, and we looked at different site sizes, because different types of employers are going to need different site sizes. So I'll give you A couple of examples. If you have a small manufacturer, they may need a fairly small site, a site, say, less than 5 acres. If you have a food and beverage manufacturer, they might need a site that's, in between 5 and 25 acres. If you have a really big chip fab or solar solar panel manufacturer, they might need a site that's upwards of 50 acres. So you can see how different types of businesses need different site sizes. We based our site sizes partially on what we know of how employment grows, how the types of sites that businesses need, and then ground truth that based on the analysis that we did with the cities that I just listed. And we also ground truthed it through discussion with Business Oregon, discussion with SEDCOR, and then some information that Business Oregon has put out about the characteristics of sites that businesses need. And so that's how we came to the less than 5 acres, the 5 to 25 acres, the 25 to 50 acres, and the 50 acre and more sites. So with that, we looked at, for each of those cities listed above, what % of existing industrial employment are on, say, sites smaller than 5 acres. On average, for all those cities, 61% of employment was on sites smaller than 5 acres. How many industrial employees are there per site? So 12. So that gave us a sense of how many employees on average there were per site. And what's the average site size? And in this case, it's 0.7 acres. So some sites less than 5 acres were, say, a half acre, a quarter acre, and some sites were probably 4.5, almost 5 acres. So there's some variance in there. At the other end, sites 50 acres and more, 8% of employment, an average of 225 employees per business, and an average site size of 96.6 acres. So we use this fact base, looking at a forecast for employment growth in the Newburgh of 2,407 new employees. If 61% of those employees were located on sites smaller than 5 acres, that's about 1,468 employees at an average of 12 employees per business. That's 122 sites. This is just simply 1,468 divided by 12. And then at an average site size of 0.7 acres, that's about 85 acres. So that's how the math in this table works. This right here, the forecast of new industrial employees, that's very specific to Newburgh. All of the rest of it is the average information that we developed looking at all of the other cities. Before I go on, does anybody have questions about what we did here?
Questions, folks?
The idea that we're trying to get to is that Newburgh in the future has a similar mix of employment sites as other cities in the Mid-Willamette Valley, which you don't right now.
Beth, just one question, and we recently saw the housing needs analysis, and one of the things that came out was that the current deficit, it was not included in that study. So in this, we've heard for years that we've got an industrial deficit. Is that currently? So is that factored in here at all?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Well, I mean, let me answer that question in a few minutes, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
So before I go on, were there any other questions? So then looking at the number, your buildable lands inventory, your number of sites, number of vacant sites from the buildable lands inventory, the forecast of new sites needed, and doing some subtraction there, you've got 33 existing sites less than 5 acres, you need 122. When you subtract, you get 89. When you multiply that 89 times 0.7 acres, you get a deficit of 62 dwelling Now you've got me a dwelling units, 62 acres of industrial land on sites less than 5 acres in size. You don't have a deficit up here at the 50 acres and more, and that's because you got the West Rock redevelopment site. But you do have a deficit here at the sites 25 to 50, and then another deficit at the sites 5 to 25. So that's how we get to the 25 acres of, 152 acres of need for industrial land. And then, well, that's the same thing, sites and acres. So the question was just raised, do we have an existing deficit of industrial land? That becomes a philosophical question, and it's a philosophical question because are there businesses that have left Newburgh because there's not an industrial land, enough industrial land? I think so. We showed in the economic opportunities analysis that there were businesses who left Newburgh, and Doug could probably help me name some of them. I don't have them in my head right now. An even harder question is, are there businesses that simply haven't come to Newburgh because there isn't enough industrial land with the right characteristics? And again, we believe that there are. It's a little harder to gauge that because that's proving a negative. But Doug, I'm sure, has some examples of businesses that may have considered Newburgh and didn't come because there just wasn't the right industrial land base. So does that mean that you have a deficit of existing industrial land? Yeah, but in a really hard to prove way. And with EOAs, it's very hard to prove that your industrial land base is worse than, say, McMinnville's, or if you scaled Salem down to Newburgh size, worse than Salem's, because it's proving a negative essentially. There's just not information to prove it empirically with.
Right. I guess what I'm trying to, so this isn't the first EOA we've done, right? There was one that would have gone up to this point.
Yes.
And at that point, it would have said you would have needed to bring in 100 acres of industrial, right, by 2020 or 2021. And if we didn't do it, wouldn't that also indicate that that was the deficit, and then the increased population would even make it more? Does that make sense?
It makes sense. What you've essentially done is you've foregone commercial and industrial growth. Put another way, you've probably increased the level of commuting that has occurred. And there's no way that you can, in a defensible way that I can think of, that you can say, yeah, we should have also had this extra 100 acres of industrial land on top of this. And so we need to expand our UGB for 250 acres. It's really hard to prove need for an expansion of a UGB for industrial land. What we did here is different than what we've tried to do for other communities. And what we're trying to show is that Newburgh just doesn't have the medium size and large sites that other cities have. And so, yeah.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. That's a hard question. Are there other questions? Okay. And so the conclusion, you have enough commercial land. You have a deficit of 96 sites or 152 acres of industrial land. And Doug, should I hand it back to you at this point?
Yes, I'll finish up. So at our last Economic Development Advisory Committee meeting for the EOA, they did develop a recommendation that the City Council accept the 2021 Newburgh Economic Opportunities Analysis Report. And then the next slide, Beth. And at the Planning Commission meeting that we had last month, they passed a resolution, 2021-368, that was recommending that City Council accept the EOA analysis. Next slide. And so I just jump, if I may, Mayor, because we're not doing a hearing. The staff recommendation is to adopt resolution 2021-3728, recommending that the city council accept the Newburgh Economic Opportunities Analysis Report.
Right. Any further questions for Doug, Beth, or Margaret? Anyone? All right. How's about a motion then? Feel free, anyone.
I move that we accept this resolution number 2021-3728.
Thank you, Mike. And a second from Jules, I think. Was that right?
Yes.
Yeah, Jules with a second. Any further discussion? All right, all in favor signify by raising your left hands, and I'll try to count y'all. Looks unanimous to me. So, all right, well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Beth. Thanks, Margaret.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, moving on. Now we're on resolution 2021-3730, and this is Affordable Housing Commission change, our city recorder.
It's me. So this is the third item to come out of the City Council Subcommittee on, I know y'all love this title, Committee System Changes. And so this is just making a change to the membership. So this committee is ruled by a resolution and not an ordinance, and it is a standing committee that oversees the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So we're just changing one paragraph, although it looks like there's a lot of pages there. We're just repealing the old one and replacing it with the new. And this makes that youth member change permanent. So to add it to the resolution. So that's it, pretty easy peasy for resolution 2021-3730.
Okay. Any questions of Sue? How's about a motion?
Mr. Mayor, I move that we adopt resolution number 2021-3730.
Second.
Second from Bryce. All right, any further discussion? All right, all in favor signify by raising your left hands. And that's it, unanimous, Sue. All right, and again, thank you to you and to Colin and all for getting us on the right track with these students. Now we just got to go out and round up some students. So there we go. All right, moving on to item 8C on your program, resolution 2021-3723. The second follow-up, a resolution of the city of Newburgh approving Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue's fire code. Mr. Rux.
Thank you, Mayor. Doug Rux, Community Development Director. So this is the companion piece to the ordinance. And so again, the citizens of Newburgh voted in November of 2017 to annex into Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue. In February of 2020, the TVF&R board adopted a new fire code. So we were approached about adopting that fire code so they can continue to provide the fire services and enforce the fire code within the city of Newburgh. I've attached in your packet the ordinance that TVF&R adopted. They also provided a fact sheet for those who might have some questions about what is the fire code. The building official has reviewed this and has no negative comments. They were all positive. We have a very positive relationship with TVF&R. We talk with the deputy fire marshal on a daily basis, I think, on different aspects of this. So the recommendation from staff is to adopt resolution 2021-3723.
Questions, folks? All right, hearing none. How's about a motion?
Mr. Mayor, I move that we adopt resolution number 2021-3723.
Second.
Second with Denise. All right, any further discussion? All in favor signify by raising your left hands. And looks unanimous again, Sue. All right. Well, we've made it to item 9A, council committee reports. If you all have anything to report, now would be the time. All right. Well, you mentioned the building official. Since you mentioned the building official, I recently was contacted by the mayor of Milwaukee, Mr. Mark Gamba, recently, to see if we would be interested in, and I don't need to bring it up now, but it's if you have any interest in pursuing, it's HB 2398 that's currently winding through Salem. It's basically trying a sustainability thing and energy efficiency in the building code, thus the reference to the building official, and something called the REACH code. So that's, I'm just mentioning that as we are being approached. I think somebody somewhere saw that one of our goals is sustainability, and now they're coming after us. So anyway, just keep that in mind. If anybody researches it, if you want to do anything further, I looked at it, you know, and again, but as I've mentioned before, affordable housing is my day thing. So I am always on alert for things that will increase costs. So that's just my take on one thing, but that could certainly change. So anything else? No. All right. What do you know? It's not even 9 o'clock. So, all right. Anything else for the good of the order? Anybody want us to sing us a song, sending us out? No, no song singing. All right. All right. Otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow night. Hey, tomorrow night, budget. All right. Bring your sharp pencils and we'll see you tomorrow. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Dan, Doug, Sue, James, and all of you counselors. Thank you so much. Have a great evening. Bye-bye.
Sign up for a vaccine.
Bye.
Yay.
Yay.